Hello, and thank you for having me today. My name is Luc Terral. I'm co-founder and CEO of Greensee. I will be speaking today about greenhouse gas emissions in the shipping industry and share our vision how artificial intelligence can help reach short and medium-term targets. As you probably know, both the IMO and the European Union have set very strict targets for greenhouse gas and CO2 emission reductions. Net zero by 2050, and the European Commission has decided to tax carbon emissions and CO2 emissions starting next year for all shipment in and out of Europe. To give you a feeling or a size of the issue there, the tax pressure we expect is about 10 billion per year within 3 years by 2026, just for shipment in and out of Europe due to tax of carbon emissions in the maritime industry. These level of tax represent a increased cost of ownership for all assets, containers, reefers, to increase 30 by 50% within those 3 years, meaning that shipping lines will occur a significant increase in their cost of operation, and most of that cost will be passed down to the market. Now, what we see as well is more administration are moving toward the same direction, enforcing strict emission regulation and starting to tax CO2 emissions. And we're thinking about California, which recently announced those decisions, but Norway as well. So the trend is not just Europe, and we all know that it's going to be a global trend, and we need to reduce carbon emissions for the planet, and regulation, and we'll be enforcing those decisions pretty soon. We hear and read a lot about e-fuel or zero carbon fuel, which are synthetic fuel, which when used, when burned, don't emit CO2. But our feeling is that those fuels are not on the horizon for a long time, another 10, 15 years, according to DNV. And as a matter of fact, over 90% of the new ships being built today, new vessels being built today, are designed and built for fossil fuel engines. And let me explain why that is. Sea shipment is very efficient in terms of CO2 emission. Sea shipment emits or generates about 100 times less CO2 than air travel, about 10 times less than road travel, and which is a good thing for shipping. 80% of what we import is coming from a maritime shipment, and that's the most efficient way to transport goods right now. The bad news is because those transport modes, such as airline or road, are using so much or emitting so much CO2 emissions, they will afford, they will buy most of the e-fuel that will be produced. And e-fuel is going to be a limited volume of production for the next 20 years at a very high cost, about 4 or 5 times more expensive than fossil fuel. And obviously, those high emission transport mode will afford and will get a quick return on investment on e-fuel when the maritime shipping industry won't afford those high expensive e-fuel for a very long time. So in summary, we believe that we are stuck in the maritime industry with fossil fuel for a very long time. We are facing more and more regulation, and regulation that are changing from country to country. Regulation that is affecting different sectors of the intermodal shipment, which is a complex one. Sure, I won't go through that slide, but you all realize that intermodal shipment is a complex business involving thousands of players, which each their own regulation, their own constraint. Bottom line, to meet emission targets, we believe that the only potential existing solution on short term is to become efficient, to reduce energy used for intermodal, and therefore to reduce emissions as well. And that can only be done by artificial intelligence, because there is a lot of data out there, and data we can use, we can leverage to find out what to do to reduce. Now, the good news is that that's precisely what we do at Greensee. We are a data analytics company, and we specialize in the maritime intermodal shipment, and with about a dozen different solutions, we are able to add up energy savings to about 20%, which equals to about 20% CO2 reduction. That's 2/3 of the target for 2030. And that's about a couple of billion saved in tax by 2026, just on reducing energy and optimizing and producing actionable insights that players can use to reduce and ship with fossil fuel, but using less fuel than today. How's that working? First of all, that doesn't require any investment. The data is there. We're using IoT data that's already being deployed and being collected. We're using booking data as well, and using third-party data such as weather forecast. We are able to, first of all, measure, count CO2 emissions, and track those emissions where they are, the source of the emission, and also provide insights and solutions to reduce those emissions. Our methodologies are compliant with current frameworks and standards, such as the ISO 14083, and they help us define ways to find solutions and the efficiency source in energy used for transport, but also for managing the whole intermodal chain end to end. Let me maybe give out a short example, a short demo of what that means and how we transform those IoT data into useful insights and solution of CO2 reduction. So we should be on an interactive dashboard. We're produced by Greensea. It's not live data. It's real data that we collected and that we've been using for demo purpose. Our actual solution is the backend. We're using it. Our customers are using it for their API, and that demo page is just for demonstration purpose to illustrate how we do things and what we can do with IoT data. What I'm showing here is a shipment from Seattle, from the US to Korea, and we can track the container trip along in ports, leaving Seattle, going onto a vessel, getting to Korea, onto a terminal, and then onto a truck to destination that might be somewhere down in the middle of Korea. That shipment, let's assume it's a 20-ton container, has produced 1.5 tons of CO2, mainly on ocean, on vessel, but also a little bit on land, and a little bit on port and handling. What we do for those kind of shipment is, first of all, we account those emissions by leg, and we give out a clear accounting of CO2 emissions, but also We will look for ways to reduce those emissions. And in that case, what we will be doing is, advising the shipping lines to optimize the intermodal transport. And what we have here is an optimized shipment for the same container leaving Seattle into Korea. But instead of arriving in one specific port, we would advise to terminate the ocean leg to a different terminal where train connectivity is available. As we saw earlier, train shipment is more efficient than road and truck shipment. So to make a long story short, that same shipment being optimized on a less emitting route would have spent 1.2 tons instead of 1.5. So that's 300 kilo for just one container shipment. We can show the same for any type of shipment around the world. That's a different one from Australia into Japan. There again, we can find another terminal that will be more efficient in terms of CO2 emissions because of waterways connectivity or train connectivity. And we would give out not only the actual CO2 emissions, but also the optimized emission, 400 kilo savings here compared to the actual. In general, we find 18 to 28% savings on those what we call benchmark routes, which don't require any new equipment or any new vessel. It's just a way to connect and choose intermodal connectivity on land. Mainly, that's where we can save. And we provide those along with actual shipment to actual CO2 emissions as a target, as a benchmark for the industry players to have reach out for reduction of CO2. So those are just a few examples of 4 container shipments, but we have in total about 200 million container shipment every year. So saving 300-400 kilos of CO2 on all of those is a significant amount of CO2 savings, and that can be done quite easily without any investment on using existing infrastructure, maybe road, train, but also waterways. And this is one example of how we use IoT and booking data to provide not only CO2 accountings and CO2 data on existing business, but also we help them find new savings potential, and we help them find ways to reduce those emissions and implement new routes or new partnerships to save on CO2 and plan for container routing with the CO2 target in mind. We are a 5-year-old company specializing in maritime optimization using AI and IoT data, and we are currently providing such services for both shippers and shipping lines, helping them reduce CO2 emissions. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Luc, for joining us and sharing that presentation with us. It's an incredibly relevant and interesting topic. I'd like to ask a few questions, going back, first of all, to the topic of taxes. Obviously, it's quite worrying that you mentioned in some areas the carbon taxes will increase from 30% to 50%. Are we saying here that the bottom line is that shipping companies need to find alternatives or find a way to pay these extortionate rates?
Well, thank you, for your questions. It is significant. What I'm showing here in the presentation is that actually this coming tax will increase shipping lines operating cost by 30-50% in some cases. And as a result, shipping lines will be pushed into both reducing reducing CO2 emissions, but also financing those. I know that many shipping lines have already announced rate increase starting 2024, increase anywhere 30 to 80, 100 euros per shipment, per container shipment to pay for those extra costs and taxes. And we believe those taxes will, as a matter of fact, will actually increase over time because they are traded on the market. And the more tax pressure is coming to the market, the higher the cost of tax. Right now, they are paying about 100 euros per ton of CO2, but we do believe that that number will increase, putting even more pressure on tax tomorrow.
Yeah, and obviously for larger enterprises, it's still a problem, but we know that, for example, some companies have looked at alternatives already, and they've introduced, for example, green methanol. What about when it comes to smaller shipping lines? How do you think that they will cope with these, hugely increasing rates?
It's definitely a challenge for a small company, a smaller shipping line. It also is for a large shipping line. E-methanol and e-fuel is a long-term solution, maybe 20, 30 years, but we do believe, and many players in the field agree with us, there won't be enough e-fuel, there won't be enough e-methanol on the short and medium term for to run all the shipping business we have currently. Those fuel are very expensive. First of all, you need to new factories to produce. It's going to be 5-10 years before we have some volumes of e-fuel, and we believe that the first production of e-fuel going to be used by airlines, which are less efficient and which will get a better return on investment on e-fuel than the maritime business. And today, we know that e-fuel are more expensive than tax plus fossil fuel. So we believe that shipping lines will remain using fossil fuel and pay tax and try to reduce reduce the emission to reduce the tax pressure. But e-fuel, e-methanol is definitely a long-term solution, but we don't see it happening before 20 years for the mass of shipping lines, and specifically for small shipping lines.
So just to summarize then, what would be your advice for the smaller companies?
Well, small and large companies need to optimize and reduce today. We know we've seen customers being able to reduce today their emissions, their fuel usage by 20%. And that's already 20% less tax to pay without any fuel, without any investment, without any retrofit on vessels. So I think all shipping lines will have to become efficient, no matter their size, small or large. I think we are in a new world today where no business can afford to waste energy, to waste fossil fuel, waste CO2 emissions when there is a way and there is a technology to save. So my advice is to implement IoT to track, collect more data, because that's the way to find optimization. That's the way to find insights and find new ways to reduce energy usage, to reduce CO2 emissions. And that's good for small and large companies.
And going back to when you showed some examples on the Greensee tracking platform, so I understand from this that Greensee analyzes the shipments, collects data, and then advises the shipping lines on how to reduce carbon emissions, whether that be from taking a different route and then relying on trains, for example. So this seems like a more sort of short-term solution, but given that we have longer-term objectives in place, like reaching carbon-free emissions in 2050, what are your plans in this respect in a more long-term?
Well, 30 years or 25 years is a long term for us, and what we have in front of us is first of all, analytics accuracy, analytics to report and track accurately each shipment. Because bottom line, that we believe that the whole industry will have to charge and pay for what is actually used and spent, including carbon emissions. Those taxes are a way to account for the impact of shipment. And every time you ship a container or any goods across the world, there is a bottom line in terms of CO2 emissions, which will end up being charged and in some way re-injected in some sort of investment into the system to become greener. There is a lot in terms of optimization. There is more and more data. There is more and more options to reduce, to optimize, to make things easier, more efficient. And that's what we've started doing. We see, more and more of those, our customers finding new ways to reduce, asking us for new optimizations, new analytics. So if the long term is e-fuel, and it will be carbon-free fuel, even then we will need to optimize and reduce whenever we can, because that fuel is going to be costly to produce, more costly than fossil fuel, and anybody, all business, us as citizens will have to be, we'll have to watch and make sure that whatever we do, whatever we buy, whatever we order, is shipped in a green and sustainable way. So sustainability is here for a very long term, I'm afraid. And even with e-fuel tomorrow, we know that energy is going to be costly and very scarce. So we have to be there with more analytics, more solutions to reduce and save whatever we can save.
So just to finish off then, Luc, would you say that you feel optimistic about, for example, becoming carbon neutral in 2050?
Well, I don't think we have a choice. I mean, well, first of all, as a co-founder of a startup, I have to be optimistic. That's my nature. There's going to be huge challenges because it's not simple. The investment cycle, the amount of investment required are huge, and we expect to see a lot of changes on the market because of tax pressure, because of CO2 regulation. But yeah, on long term, I don't think I don't think we can afford to stop and reduce the shipment. Maritime shipment is the most efficient in the world, compared to road or airline. That won't change. So I think maritime shipment is there for long term, and we just need to find the right technologies to make it, help it become greener. 25 years from now, let's hope it's all green and zero carbon emission. I think the technology is going to be there. The challenge is more a financial one, and people have to realize and accept that it's a new world now, accept to change and invest and take some risks. So I think bottom line, the industry will change and become carbon neutral by 2050.
Well, thank you very much, Luc, once again, for all of the insight that you shared with us today at International Trade Live.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.